Well, today is Friday, February 28th in 2025, and it is the last day of February. For those of us who live in the Midwest, we very happy to say goodbye to February, one of the worst winters we've had in a long time, and that's true of other places in the country as well. But anyway, we're ready for the month of March, which comes the day after we record this. We welcome you to the Chapter 49 podcast. Chapter 49 represents most IRS employees in the state of Indiana. My name is Larry Lannan. I help Chapter 49 with communications as a volunteer. And we once again welcome back to the podcast our chapter president, Duncan Giles.
Thanks, Larry. It's always good to be here.
It's good for the two of us to be here, and we're going to try to, once again, do away with the small talk to start this off. We may even go over 30 minutes today. We just have so much to discuss. And we're going to start off with, just to let you know what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about return to office and telework. We're going to talk about what's happening with probationary employees in the courts and the legal process. We're going to talk about the reduction in forced rifts being threatened, to talk more detail about that. We're going to talk about what we know, which isn't much, about postal duty shutting down, taxpayer assistance center shutting down. We'll tell you what we do know about that. The House has passed a budget framework. We don't think that's good news, but it's not the final word, and we will talk more about that. But finally, we do want to mention that the service is offering mental health and welfare sessions. The management is providing that to employees, and we want to make sure everyone knows about that. So, Duncan, to start off our podcast today, there's so much going on, but we do want to talk about return to office. We do have a contract in place for telework. It's been in place since the mid-90s, and there have been massages to it, but the basic part of it, meaning you come in 2 days to the office every pay period, every 2 weeks, has been in there since the mid-1990s. Now there are tremors going around that perhaps there are people in government that want to abrogate that contract. In other words, they want to just ignore the contract and tell everyone you must come into the office 5 days every week. We don't have an official order or document saying that, but we're hearing an awful lot about it. And I know right before we record this, and again, everything we say on this podcast are as of just after 10 a.m. Eastern Time on February 28th, 2025. Things can happen after or during this podcast. I mean, I may have to pick my phone up and say, okay, but there's something new, but we'll tell you what we know now. And we try our best to keep you up to date at our Facebook page. You're always welcome to like and follow it. Just go to Facebook, go to NTEU Chapter 49 Indiana. We've had a lot more people sign up for it. We welcome you, and we'll welcome people who've spread the word about this podcast as well. But let's get back to return to office. Return to office, this idea of coming back into the office 5 days a week, not honoring the contract NTEU and IRS have had, roughly with the same provision since the 1990s. So, Duncan, what's the latest? What can you tell?
Okay. I can tell you that everybody needs to get stiff drinks because it's going to be a bumpy ride for quite a while. On return to office, what we're hearing is that next week, facilities is going to be going out to the post of duty, I know in the state of Indiana, and I'm assuming the rest of the country, to check, validate, see what seats are empty, what seats are not, things of that nature, to prepare for a return to office. Now, as you mentioned, we've got a national agreement that covers telework. This was reopened in 2024, and the basic framework was not changed. Now, I won't say management because it's nothing to do with IRS. It's Treasury and above. This has nothing to do with IRS. The Treasury and above is saying, well, this is a management right. We can just unilaterally decide that we want to end telework and make people return to office. That's malarkey. I'll use a nice term for that one, not the term I wanted to. This is a contract that's signed. I mean, this is a legally binding contract. Not to mention there's the Telework Act of 2010 that Congress passed that gives, rights to telework. What I am hearing, and again, this could change on a dime. It could be pushed back. It could be moved around forward. But what I'm hearing, and a couple of other seasoned chapter presidents that I network with are hearing, is that the week after next, it looks like they are going to be calling back non-bargaining and management folks. So the week of the 10th, they're going to be contacting those folks, or will be saying, you have to come back to the office. We're hearing, and again, I can't confirm this, but this is what we're hearing, and I want folks to be prepped if they do get something on this, is that they are going to then require, after that, the week of the 17th, if we're working, to come back into the office. Now, at that point, once they send something out to bargaining unit employees saying that they want us to come back to the office, I can flat guarantee you that National NTEU will be doing whatever they need to do, whether it be filing a grievance, going to the Merit System Protection Board, going into the courts, whatever it is, to enforce our legal rights under the agreement. So I can tell you, from Doreen Greenwald on down, we're ready for this. We've prepared for it. We've been hearing these rumblings. Now it looks like it's going to be coming to fruition. And again, this is not coming from IRS. I don't think IRS leadership wants to any part of this, because they understand that we are working, that employees on telework are more productive. The studies have all shown this. But yet these anecdotal evidence that comes up and says, oh, they're only effective if they're in the office, they're on the golf course. That one I love. We're on the golf course when we're actually supposed to be working from home. No, we're the ones actually working. And this is coming from somebody who doesn't telework, but I know the vast majority of employees I represent do telework and do a fantastic job of making sure the work they need to do is done. So we just want folks to be prepared for this and know that we were going to be hitting back on this as soon as we get notice on this.
And my favorite story was, I think, a senator from Iowa who claimed that people were taking bubble baths when they were supposed to be working at home. Now that was crazy. And when she made this public statement, the media came back and wanted some documentation of it, and of course they never got it. But even if one person did that and we found out about that person would be disciplined. You're not supposed to do that. So anyway, we are going to do everything we can to enforce our contract. And as you said, Duncan, there are even laws about telework. And there's so much misinformation about telework. I mean, going around. And you have touched on some of it. And we have tried our best to try to set the record. So we talked to Doreen Greenwald about this, and she goes, hey, we're doing everything we can to educate the public and the Congress and everybody else what the real facts are. But when you have the Speaker of the House saying 2% of federal employees are coming, or 6% of federal employees are coming into the office, that when the Speaker of the House says that you wonder where the truth and the facts lie. So be rest assured, if there are edicts that come down, we're bargaining. Now, they can do what they want with the managers and the non-bargaining people. They're not covered by our contract. But if there's an effort made to bring bargaining unit employees covered by our contract into the office 5 days a week, and they want to completely ignore the provisions of our contract with the IRS, we are going to do everything. That's a red line for NTEU, and we are to do everything we can to protect them. Speaking of red lines, we are also.
Well, I do want to add one. I do want to add one thing to that. Is
Duncan,
the fact is, once you get this order, until you hear from National NTU and management that it's been rescinded, please follow the order that you're getting from management in writing. If they're telling you to report back to work, we don't want anybody to get hit with anything like insubordination, not following orders, things of that nature. So if you do get that order in writing, let your chapters know. If you're in Indiana, let me know. Let our Chief Steward VP, Gail Groves, know. Or if you're in another chapter outside the state of Indiana, let your chapter know, so that we can make sure that national office is aware of this and start building a case. But we don't want anybody to say, well, you know what, this is wrong, so I'm not going to do it, because that's the case that management can use this for an insubordination, and we don't want anybody to put themselves in harm's way because they're looking for any excuse right now. And when I say they, I'm again talking Treasury and above, to do things to people to get them out.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. We've mentioned this several times, and this is a good time to that reminder. We do not want you to disobey a direct order. Ask for it in writing, and if you don't get it in writing, document that as well. But, and I think you will probably get it in writing, but who knows? We want you to let your local chapters know if you're being given an order that contradicts the contract. Let us, as NTEU, take it from there, and we will. But in the meantime, please do not subject yourself to an insubordination allegation. That's a horrible representational thing to have to deal with. Duncan, I know you've had a few of those. I don't think I ever had one, but there are so very few cases of it in the past. But just be aware of the fact that you must obey a direct order, get it in writing, request it in writing, and we will take it from there and try to represent you. We are going to make sure that we will press for the law to be followed. But speaking of red lines, and that's one, telework certainly, and the return to office issue, this whole issue of probationary employees being let go, we do not feel that the law has been followed, and we're not the only ones. We are one of not only our legal staff, but other federal unions, other nonprofit groups who are very concerned about this issue or outside of government, the nonprofits that are not even the unions who are concerned about this issue. We're all in court. We're pooling our resources. We did lose our effort in the D.C. court to get an immediate injunction. The judge didn't say he was going to go with us or against us. Didn't feel, and again, immediate injunctions are hard to get, but we did our best. But now, again, this is as of just after 10 a.m. Eastern time on Friday, February 28th, 2025. There was last night an edict from a judge, I believe in San Francisco, who basically said, hey, government, you have illegally fired these probationary employees. You need to hire them back. We do expect there'll be an appeal. We do expect all sorts of legal entanglements, but this is a good piece of news as all of these legal actions are going on throughout the country at several federal district courts. So, Duncan, I know this is confusing for a lot of people. We get one judge that says one thing, another judge that says another in another part of the country. That we have appeals courts, and of course, we always have the U.S. Supreme Court if they want to get involved. So, I'm curious, how should an employee try to untangle this web of legal developments?
Yeah, this is one of those things where National NTU has been in contact with all fired probationary employees that they represent from the 37 different agencies, I believe it is now, that they represent. And in my way of thinking about this, and what really upsets employees when they got their letter is that they were fired due to performance. And to a person, and when I've talked to management and the employees, none of them have been poor performers. It has been just that was the excuse. What this boiled down to, this was not a termination of a probationary employee. This was a riff of, and we'll get into that later, of probationary employees across the federal government. Not just IRS, but across the federal government. And there are proper procedures that have to be followed in doing something like that, that again, we'll get into in a little bit. But because of this, the judge in San Francisco basically said, first, their main thing was OPM directed all the agencies to do this. And the judge said OPM does not have that power to direct the agencies to do this thing. The agencies must do it themselves. And again, that opens up the agencies for, okay, you're saying they didn't perform well. Here's what the documentation is for each employee. We're not seeing this, therefore you terminated them falsely and they should be reinstated. So there's a lot of, like you said, moving pieces going on, and the fact that there's different judges, appeal rights, and I can guarantee you this is If it hasn't already been appealed by the government, it will be. But the folks who are NTU members and are continuing to be NTU members at no dues cost to them, because NTU National realizes how badly they've been treated. They're getting the information on what to do, where to go, to look at the different mass lawsuits that there are out there in addition to NTU's efforts. So they're getting the information from National. And I couldn't be prouder of our folks at National for stepping up and jumping all over this, as they will about all of the issues that are going to be coming up before us.
Duncan, let's talk about a reduction in force. I'll be corrected if I'm wrong on this, but I believe I'm correct when I say this, that the Internal Revenue Service, to my knowledge, has never conducted what we would call a reduction in force in its entire history. There was one situation in the 1990s where IRS was prepared to do a reduction in force. There may still be a few people around IRS still that remember a little thing called DOS-2. It was an acronym, and what it basically meant was the management was proposing to consolidate some of the work being done by the examination division and reducing the number of offices that would do it and reducing the number of people that would do it. So we were at the bargaining table with these exam executives and kept asking them, I said, okay, you're not changing the workload, so how are you going to get this work done with fewer people? And finally, the management threw their hands up and says, well, we don't know. We're still going to have the same amount of work for fewer people. We don't know how we're going to get the work done. I won't get into all the details. We got Congress involved, and IRS could not convince Congress in the end that how they were going to get this work done with fewer people. And IRS finally just called the whole thing off. That was the closest we ever came. I was a union official at that time and received a detailed training class on reduction in force. Now, I want to say also, in addition to what the government regulations and the law have to say, NTEU has some additional provisions in our contract. Look at your national agreement. There's a whole article on reduction in force, and there are other layers NTEU is requiring management to go through. I'm not going to get into all those details, but I want to just give people an idea what a reduction in force would mean. It's one of the most complicated and impossible to understand processes. But I'm going to give you an overview, because if the management wants to do a RIF, the first thing they have to do is do two things. Number one, establish what are called competitive areas. These are geography situations. Indianapolis, or maybe certain counties in Indiana, would be one competitive area. And out west in Wyoming, it might be a whole state that could be a competitive area. You don't know. And management has some authority as to what they want to do, but they have to establish these competitive areas, the geography. Then once you get the competitive areas established, you have what are called within those areas competitive levels. That simply means how you classify people based on their position, their personnel series, their grade, the duties that are similar. You start putting people into categories based on their competitive levels with those criteria involved. So what will happen is once those competitive levels are figured out, based on those guidelines, then when you start doing a reduction in force, you look at people within those competitive areas and then competitive levels within those competitive areas. Are you beginning to understand why this is not simple? Next thing that will be taken into consideration, once you've done all that, okay, how do you determine who is going to be the first people that are subject to a reduction in force? The first people that would be subjected to a reduction in force and let go would be people that are, guess what, probationary, temporary. And I was a temporary employee at the Department of Defense for a few months before I ended up at IRS. I know what being a temp, we don't have as many temps as we used to, but we have some, particularly in processing centers, but not as many as we used to. So temp employees aren't as common, but we certainly do have probationary employees. And probationary employees would be one of the first people to be let go if there was a reduction in force. So if you are permanent career or career conditional, you're considered permanent in that situation. But the first people to go would be probationary, so essentially at the IRS or any temp employees we might have. One thing you will have at your advantage if you're a veteran and you have been served in the military, is that your veterans' preference will be an advantage for you when you go into a reduction in force. You'll be one of the last people that would be rift or part of that reduction. And again, once we look at all these people within the competitive area and then the competitive levels, we're going to look at length of service. What's your service computation date? That's what's going to be used in this situation. What is your length of service based on others compared to others? Look at all, now what can happen in the end when you've looked at all these other factors in a certain order. It is possible that your performance appraisal can be brought into play, but that, as I understand it, normally would only be brought into play if you have almost a tie or a very close call. So performance appraisals can break a tie or make a difference if you've looked at these other factors and you have people who are very close on that list of criteria. You do have the right to appeal. You have to have 60 days notice. Now, there's something I am not going to get into. There's a system called bumping and retreating, where you bump people that have based on that criteria I mentioned, or you can retreat back to a lower graded position you might have had before. So I'm not going to get into that, but that is all part of the process. And to be honest, Duncan, based on what I remember, and it's been a while since I took this class, is that complex situation is so complicated. I'm not confident any management can do it the right way. And if it's not done the right way, guess what? NTU is going to get involved, and we're going to start demanding that the management do it right. You have appeal rights under our contract. You have appeal rights to the Merit Systems Protection Board. All those appeal rights are there. Also, if you are RIFT, if you are let go through this process, you have a system of severance pay, and what severance pay you get depends on your years of service. You also would be eligible for unemployment benefits. It's not your fault you're being let go. There's also a priority placement program within the government where you could maybe get a job at another agency, but good luck if all this happens since everybody else is getting RIFT the way things are looking now. And hopefully, people will get early retirement options. We don't know all the details of that. We would hope that some early retirement would be eligible for people who are close enough to the retirement age. And of course, if you are retirement eligible, you can just retire. I'm sorry to go into that. And believe me, what I just gave you is a real simple overview, Duncan. I just want people to know when we talk about reduction in force, this is the system we're talking about. And I just want to give people just a small mental idea of everything that's involved. And trust me, if we go through this, we will make sure all of our contract provisions, so I didn't even get into where there's all kinds of other notifications and appeals you can make within the NTEU IRS contract. We'll make sure that the management is adhering to that. And I just want to get your comment on the complexity and complicated nature of actually conducting a reduction in force.
Yeah, very, very nice overview, Larry. Just to give you folks an idea, on the OPM website, the reduction in force, how to work it, how to do it, things of that nature. I did an overview again of it this morning, 119 pages. 119 pages on how to do a RIF. And again, as Larry alluded to, there are several other provisions in our agreement specific for the IRS on what needs to be done, in addition to that, things that they have to go to NTU for. Basically, it's almost like a sanity check. Is this being done correctly? How do we know this? Then when you get, they have to keep redoing this when they get to, as you alluded to, bump and retreat, which makes it very complicated. Now, saying all of that, it takes a long, long time to do a RIF. We have not gotten any notice, but we're hearing about it, that they're planning on it, and we're seeing it on other agencies. I have no faith that they will do this correctly, and again, when I'm talking Treasury and above, because IRS is being given this directive, the IRS doesn't want to RIF people because they know the work is still there and it's not going to be done. I am hearing that there are going to be a large percentage of folks RIFed. Absolutely abhorrent numbers that I'm hearing percentage-wise. And I just want everybody to be prepared for this. What they're looking to do is to have this all done by the end of the fiscal year, September 30th. Have the people that they want off the rolls by that date. I think that's extremely ambitious. I don't think they'll be able to do it legally in that time. I think that there are going to be a lot of issues that NTU National will be jumping on. First being that, legally we don't need to do a RIF because the work is still there, the funding is still there. So because of that, it's going to be, an issue right off the bat. But it's going to be a long process. If it's done, again, correctly and done right. If it's not, we'll be doing the same thing. We'll be doing, for example, things like telework. Wherever we need to protest this in, do national grievances, go to MSPB, go to the courts, whatever step it needs to take, NTU will be prepared to do it. But this administration is hell-bent on making sure that the federal government is slashed and burned. I can't, there's no other real term for it. This is not being done surgically. It's not looking for bloat or anything of that nature. It's just cutting jobs left and right with no regard to the work that still needs to be done. And so I have no faith that this will be done correctly by those that are imposing it. By those that are trying to implement it, I think I'll try to do the best job they can and do it legally and correct, but I think they're going to have people breathing down their necks.
Duncan, I want to use a word we have not heard much since the Nixon administration. The word is impoundment. Now, why am I using the word impoundment? Because there was a judge that ruled just the other day, again, we're recording this on February 28th, just the other day that said that this shutting down of USAID, basically foreign aid agency, and they do some other things as well, that there's a budget for USAID and that the White House and the administration did not have the legal authority to shut it down and gave the administration a deadline just recently, like at midnight, I think Wednesday it was, to start funding it again and bring the employees back. They went to the U.S. Supreme Court. The Supreme Court held that local judge's order in abeyance. So we're going to get a ruling from the United States Supreme Court quite soon as to whether or not a president can, and this is the word, impound money. In other words, money has been appropriated by the Congress. It's in the budget. There's an Impoundment Act, which was passed in the 70s. It said presidents cannot refuse to spend money that has been appropriated and budgeted by the Congress. The Supreme Court is going to look at this. Duncan, this is going to be a very important thing to watch.
It's going to be huge because the Impoundment Act, as you mentioned, was passed during the Nixon administration or right after the Nixon administration to make sure that this precise thing does not happen. If Congress appropriates the monies, those funds need to be spent. So we will be watching this very, very closely.
Duncan, there's something else that happened. The Washington Post published a story just a couple of days ago, and their story, and they have a very good set of reporters working on this, so I know they've talked to people in the know. It basically says that, and it did say in the story that the IRS intends to close 110 taxpayer assistance centers and is looking at not renewing leases for a number of posts of duty throughout the country. We have no details on this. I mean, that would be like what, 1/3 of the taxpayer assistance center, something like that. It may not be precisely that, but it's in that neighborhood. And when I wrote something for our Facebook page, I basically said, what you need to do if you work in a TAC is to go ahead and send a message to your staff or your member of Congress, both senators, and explain who comes into your TAC and needs help. The low-income people, the elderly people, the people who cannot use technology easily, just don't have technology to use. And the people that are serviced at these I managed taxpayer assistance centers. I know a little something about this. the people who use that service really don't have any other options that are available to them in any reasonable way in their situation. You need to tell the members of Congress this. You need to tell your friends and neighbors to tell members of Congress and senators this. And I would say talk to your local elected officials, your mayors, your city councilmen, your county officials that are representing people where you live. Have them, they have clout too with members of Congress and senators, and let their staff know that, hey, this will have an impact on our local community and it's going to be a negative one. So, and if we don't even know which offices are on the block, we just know that there's talk about this or it wouldn't have ended up in the Washington Post. We don't have details. We just have what's in there. And I credit the Washington Post for at least putting this up publicly so we can have a discussion about it. So, Duncan, I think the main thing here is we are certainly getting some information that there's a push to close taxpayer assistance centers and the offices in which they're housed, and maybe other offices. We don't know. So, again, we are very careful to let people know what's out there publicly. But if we're communicating something, we want to be factual in what we say. What do we know factually about all this at this time?
As you said, very little. The only place that we've seen where they want to close that about 30% or so of the tax across the country is in the Washington Post. That hasn't been reported elsewhere. Like you said, the Post has some good reporters, so maybe nobody else has gotten that story. But, FMSS, our facilities folks, did come out and say, the head of FMSS, the acting head, said, yes, we are going to be looking at closing posts of duty. When leases end or if we can cancel a lease, we're going to be looking at that. We have no idea where they're talking about, how many they're talking about, what's going to happen to the employees, what happens if there's not another post of duty within their commuting area, which in most of the country there probably won't be. There are so many questions going on right now, as there is with everything else. We don't know the answers to this. We're looking for the answers, and National NTU is asking straight up for the answers on this and details on this. And to my knowledge, it hasn't been provided yet. So, as Larry said, we're trying to get out information. We're telling you what we know. We're also telling you what we don't know. And a lot of times, people go, well, why isn't this information coming from my executives or my manager or something like that? Your manager may not have a clue. Your executives may be ordering management down the line to not say anything because that's the marching orders they have. So we have the freedom, being your representatives, and to you being, the bargaining unit representatives, to bring you this information. And again, we're not trying to frighten you. We're not trying to scare you. I'm a guy, I hope for the best, but I plan for the worst. So I want to make sure everybody has this information so they're aware of it and can plan accordingly.
And as somebody who managed taxpayer assistance centers for about 6 years in the end of my career, I can assure you, I know of no taxpayer assistance manager who would withhold information they were, number one, knew, or number two, had the authority to tell the employees. I never held anything back from my employees unless I was ordered to, and only in a situation like that. So don't blame your managers. And don't even blame some of the executives at IRS, because as Duncan has mentioned more than once, they're not necessarily on board with this. They know what this agency is required to do under the law and how we can get that done with the kind of staff reductions that the White House is wanting to implement is beyond anybody's comprehension. While all this is going on, the House of Representatives passed a budget. Now, a budget is kind of the first step of a budget. It's a framework. And again, we don't even have a budget for our current year. We're looking at budgets for that year and on. We believe that this budget framework that was passed is bad news for federal employees, for agencies to be funded and run their agencies in a way to fulfill their responsibilities under the law. It's bad for people on Medicaid. It's bad for states, the individual states funding their Medicaid programs. But it's just as far as it impacts IRS and other federal agencies that are represented by NTEU. We know this budget is bad news. The Senate has made it clear they have other ideas, but it's sad that the budget is starting in such a bad place in the House of Representatives. So I think what we need to let people know, and I want Duncan to weigh in and tell us more, is that this is the first step, and we think it's a bad step the House has taken. But we have to get into the nuts and bolts of where the money is going and not going. That's the next step in the budget process, and that's where things get very hard. And that's where we as a union will be watching it, and we'll be letting you know what you need to communicate to your elected.
With the budget, as you said, it's a framework. The real details here are going to come when they have to break it down into exactly what they're going to be doing. Are they actually going to cut, Medicaid or Medicare? Are they actually going to do something with SNAP? Are they going to do something with agriculture, with, federal employee issues? All of those different things are going to play into it. And we just have to wait and see. But yeah, we would urge you to contact your senators and congresspeople again on this to let them know that, you want to make sure that everything that you need for your job, your family, things of that nature are being protected.
So once again, it's a framework for a budget. The details are going to be worked out in the various committees. And then both first House and the Senate will have to come up with the final numbers. We know the framework is bad news. That much we do know. So we'll keep you updated on our Facebook page and on this podcast about developments. And also, if we'll encourage you once again, if you're a member of NTU, to go to ntu.org and sign up for the emails. The National Union is doing an excellent job of sending these emails out to members to keep everyone updated on what's going on. Duncan, I want to mention one last thing here, because with all that's going on, I will have to give the management credit. They are offering mental health and welfare sessions, and knowing that employees are going through a difficult time. So what do we know about that?
Yeah, I'm really proud of the Human Capital Office for setting this up, for letting employees know that they can go to their managers to get some time for one or two of these sessions, and if possible, to watch them with others. We're all feeling just abused and beaten up, because we are being abused and beaten up. And, what they're trying to do is, anything that can help your mental health. And this also goes for EAP. Don't hesitate at all to sign up for one of these sessions, or if you need to talk to somebody one-on-one, to contact EAP. I'm a huge one. My we've mentioned before, my daughter Maddie is a mental health counselor. I'm a huge believer in taking care of your mental health as well as your physical health. And I think these sessions that have been set up, and there's so many different ones, that there's something for everybody, as well as, like I said, if you need to be reaching out to EAP to do that, just to make sure that you're taking care of yourself during these times.
Okay, Duncan, good to know that. If you feel you need to avail yourself of that, don't be shy. Go ahead and do it. If you need it, go ahead and take advantage of it. The IRS is offering this to you. And with that, Duncan, Giles, your final comment for this podcast.
Mine is going to be not great. And that is, I would urge everyone, from what I'm hearing, between all these things, return to office, closing down of PODs, and talking about the RIFs and things of that nature, get your resumes together and take a look for a possibility of other opportunities outside the federal government. NTEU is going to be fighting for everything. Don't mistake my advice for saying, oh, we're giving up or anything of that nature. But hope for the best, plan for the worst. I want everybody to be ready to do what they need to do for their family, to be honest with you, for themselves and their families. You need to do what's best for you. And sometimes that is moving on. And with the situation that we have now, I don't want anybody to move on, but I want to make sure that they're taking care of themselves. And to do that, you may have to look for other opportunities, because at the end of it all, what's going to happen is, if there are rifts, there's either going to be very few people doing a ton of work that they're not going to be keeping on top of, or you're going to be able to get either a Vera or VISIP if they offer separation incentive payments. And then once that's gone, or if you have severance pay, once that's gone, you're on your own. And I want to make sure that people are planning not just for now, not just for tomorrow, but also for the future. So don't take it as Duncan says, I need to go out and get another job right this minute. I'm not saying it because it's going to be a long process, but I want you to make sure that you're exploring every option that's going to be best for you and your family.
You know, Duncan, when I retired and gave my retirement speech, I remember the message that I tried to give, and there were a lot of people. I really appreciate the people that came to my retirement dinner. It was really nice to have so many people come and wish me well. And the one message I gave them is that everyone should be very proud of the work they all have done. If you work at IRS and you have done your work for a number of years, you are doing it well, or you wouldn't still be there. You would not have passed your probationary period, which we know all about now. So everyone should be proud of the work that they're doing, the work they have done, because how many people come out of the accounting schools or the stars of the accounting schools that come to IRS and cannot do an audit for the IRS, or people who have been successful in other walks of life that go try to become a revenue officer, do collection work for IRS, can't do it. I worked in toll-free for years, and we always knew when there was an economic downturn, we would have people applying for the seasonal jobs in toll-free with PhD degrees and people, and they thought they would come in and in a matter of months would run the whole agency. Most of those people came literally running out of the building screaming because they couldn't do that toll-free job. That's a hard job, but it's not for everyone. So with that, what you said, I want to also say, feel proud of the work you've done, because not everybody can do this work. And the country will suffer if you leave. But if you have to do it for your own sake, listen to what Duncan had to say. But Duncan, I hate to be so negative, so I'm going to give some good news. There is some good news. It's for a limited number of people, like myself, but it is good news. The Social Security Administration has announced that this new law, which will add benefits for people who had been subjected to the windfall elimination or WEP limitation and the government pension offset GPO, those people are now going to get extra money from Social Security, which I thought we'd always, I'm one of them, so you know, had deserved. We'd worked in the private sector for years, went to government, and I was under the old CSRS system. So we had a very big penalty. Congress changed the law. Social Security initially said it may take a year. They got 3 million people to deal with. So I didn't complain. That I feel sorry for the people working at Social Security having to do this. But I have to give the Social Security Administration and the employees that are working there, who are under the same RIF cloud that IRS and all other agencies are under. And Social Security has been underfunded for a number of years and understaffed for a number of years. Yet, we received an announcement that people like myself will be getting, number one, our back pay from last year, which this became effective in the beginning of 2024. So we'll have some back money coming from Social Security, and the new higher monthly benefits. Rather than taking several months, maybe a year, they have a plan in place to get this done in a number of weeks. So my kudos to Social Security, the management, the employees. Got to give them so much credit for what they're doing under a very difficult set of circumstances, trying their very best, working hard to give people what the law has just given them. So that's good news, and not a lot of good news, and maybe for only a certain number of people. But Duncan, I thought we needed a little good news at the end of this podcast. And we do thank you for watching our podcast. We thank Duncan Giles. We thank you for watching or listening. This is the Chapter 49 podcast. If you think this was a good podcast and might be of use to others, don't be afraid to send the link to others. We have had a big increase in the number of people watching and listening, and I think it's because of the circumstances. And we continue, Duncan and I try very hard to make this topical and with news that you could use. We're doing it once a week, so we obviously aren't on top of everything, but that's what our Facebook page is for. You're certainly welcome to follow or like that. So with all that in mind, we once again thank you for watching and listening. Please be safe and be kind.